Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution we know we need. Our next guests are being referred to as Refuseniks, youth who, when presented with an order to enlist in the Israeli military, said no. I'll be honest, this one was a hard one for me to prepare for. Although I give them space to share their personal experience going up against the Zionist state, all of us were careful not to dwell on it. And you'll hear them both say this as well, but I wanted to make it clear that nothing they've gone through compares to what Palestinians face every day, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. Their courage comes from a place of privilege, and applause isn't the point of amplifying their voices. Really, the most valuable parts of this interview are the assessments Tal and Einat provide on the Israeli society and its current appetite for peace. The support systems the Refuseniks have had to create in that increasingly hostile environment, and the ways in which we can force an end to the occupation of Palestine from where we are. Here it is. Welcome to Blueprints. Please introduce yourself to the audience.
So I'm Einat Gerlitz. I'm 21 years old, from Tel Aviv, and I'm an activist, a refuser. I sat 87 days in military prison for refusing, and since then I'm involved in the refusal movement, the human rights field, back in back home.
Tal.
I'm Tal Mitnik. I'm 19. I'm a 19-year-old Israeli Jewish activist from Tel Aviv. I was also the first conscientious objector to the draft since October 7th, and I spent 185 days in military prison for refusing to enlist.
Yeah, Tal, your case made a bit of waves for that reason. It's quite easy to find Tal's story out there. I'll link folks to some of the pieces they have done. You know, we only have 45 minutes, and there's a lot to talk about. Especially on this show, we have been talking about Palestine for quite some time, since before October 7th. And so the audience has probably got a lot of questions for folks coming straight out of Israel, and especially for refusers. Refuseniks is the name of the speaking tour. Well, not the name of the speaking tour, but you folks are going around Canada right now, pretty much the whole month of March.
Yes.
What do you hope to accomplish from that?
So we were very excited to get the invitation from IJV, from Independent Jewish Voices, to do this tour, going through 13 cities. I think we hope to have we're having amazing platforms to share our refusal stories and our perspectives, and give insight on Israeli society and the activism that we do as Israelis inside the Israeli society against the occupation and the genocide, and creating stronger solidarity connections between the struggle back home and over here.
I think for some people, it's easy to see the Israeli society as this homogenous society, and part of the reason we come here is to show that there are Israelis that are resisting from within. We may be a small amount, but we will not stop, and we do exist.
Your prominence, or the extent of this movement in the Israeli society, would that surprise us? Is it growing, or is it a really tough environment right now? I mean, to put it mildly.
It's hard to say that it's growing. I can say that most of Israeli society right now, according to polls, support a ceasefire, hostage deal, stopping the war and moving towards a peaceful solution. That to say, also, most of Israeli society support the Trump plan to transfer 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza. So we are a very, very big minority, a small minority in our society, coming out in support or in even just saying that there are people that deserve to live in Gaza.
It's radical to say.
It's very, very radical.
I mean, I can't even imagine, because it feels like in Canada right now, it's radical to say that. So from within the Zionist state, I can only imagine the backlash that you folks faced when you first refused to enlist. Do you want to talk? I mean, Tal, I've got you saying that you knew well before October 7th. Your date to enlist was around December, the following, like 3 months later, but you knew well before that you would not participate in that aspect of the occupation. Why? Can you just answer me why? Even though you knew what kind of climate it was already to do something like that?
Before October 7th, now we look back on it and we see it as this peaceful times maybe, but we were living with occupation, with siege, with apartheid, and the erasure of Palestinian identity has been a constant thing since before 1948. I think the realization that there are people on the other side, and that this kind of endless fighting and endless oppression serves very certain people, serves people that have ideologies of Jewish supremacy, serves the Zionist narrative that everyone around us wants to attack us. And we perpetuate that narrative by oppressing other people, and that oppression brings resistance. So when realizing that, I realized that I couldn't take part in the system that hurts my Palestinian neighbors and also hurts my society. So I decided that I could not enlist to an army that occupies another people. And when October 7th happened, the biggest trauma Israeli society has had, and since,
Many
years, it became Israeli society. If it was fascist before, if we thought we were like going to hell before, now we're even more. There were people getting arrested for Facebook posts. A protest was basically outlawed. It was a scary time to be an activist, a leftist activist in Israel, and especially, and not that's not even to say how scary it was to be a Palestinian, just having Palestinian identity in the West Bank or in 48. And in this environment, I had my enlistment date coming up. And at the start, I was hesitant because I did not know. Until now, we haven't had violence against us inside the prison. We didn't know how it would what would happen. It was kind of this unprecedented thing where this is the biggest, like, we have a genocide going on, and what are they going to do with refusers during a genocide? I hesitated a little, and I'm kind of embarrassed now to say how much I hesitated, but in the end, I always knew that it was the right thing to do, and that I did not, sorry, just to be clear, I did not hesitate if to enlist or not. I was hesitating if to go public with it or not, because I could have very easily just refused silently, maybe went to prison for a little bit, and no one would have heard of me. But because of my privilege and because of the background I come from and the supportive family that I have and supportive group of friends that I have, I realized that it's not only something I should do, it's something I have to do. And speaking out for people who don't have the same privileges as me, and using my privileges to try to influence the system to take apart these systems of privilege.
You mentioned like quiet resistors. Are there a lot of them?
We don't have the numbers. The military doesn't release numbers of people who go to the conscientious committee, who appeal to the conscientious committee, or of people who get the different numbers of people who get different exemptions. So we do not have the numbers. In Missalvot network, which is the network that we come from, we support both public ones and non-public ones. So we only have the numbers of the public refusers. There are many people that refuse and either sit in prison or don't sit in prison, but they're not public because because they can't or don't want to for various reasons. Using isn't necessarily a privilege, but being public about it definitely is. And a privilege in a sense of having a supportive family, supportive friend group, having the support system of Misalvot, that kind of privilege.
Can we talk a little bit about what those support systems look like? Because a lot of the listeners, won't be faced, hopefully, with having to be conscripted or to enlist. But, daily we see increasing police state tactics. We know our police train one another, right? And we're seeing the same kind of suppressive tactics used here. And we've found that creating networks around those folks who have maybe been arrested and whatnot is the best way to allow more people to come forward and resist. So can you talk about Meservat? What that support system looks like and where it needs to go even?
So Misalvot means refusers in the feminine congregation in Hebrew. From a feminist agenda. It's a network that exists since 2016. There has been a refusal movement since the country was founded, but Misalvot is a more new kind of network that brings the feminist agenda and queer liberation agenda more in the front of the refusal. So in Misalvot, we provide legal assistance, which is vital. It's I don't know how we would have went through what we went through without having the legal support. It is very crucial because there aren't clear principles of the military, and we can get into it later if you want, but because uncertainty it's a very big factor. Like we don't really know what to expect. Like the only thing we control is the refusal itself, refusing to enlist, and from there on we're in the military's hands and we don't know what to expect. So it's very important to have the legal assistance. And other than that, we have a social network of people before, during, and after refusal, supporting each other, doing political activities together, organizing protests, writing letters to the ones who refuse, organizing public events about refusal, about criticizing the militarism in our society. We've made a few zines. We're a lot on social media, spreading out our stories and our voices. So it's a really amazing network, and talking about how, as activists, we can support each other, whether it's in front of the police, in front of the military, or just in front of the fascist parts of our society. I think community is the key here. Having a strong community of people, it doesn't have to be big, but once you have a community of people who care for each other, and you have more experienced people that share their experience to the new ones. In Misalvot, we have an older refuser adopting a current refuser, and they're like an older sibling for them in a way. I think that's very, very meaningful, and we're very I'm very happy that I'm part of that, and that we can that now I can give back to the new refusers after I was supported when I refused. So I think that it's very important to have community and to have that support system, especially when not everyone's families are supportive.
Recently, we started having parents of refusers mentor other parents, which is nice because they also need support, because it's not easy to have a kid that's sitting in prison. My mom is now, she's really great, and she's helping other refusers' moms and talking to them and calming them down about their worries and other things. And I think we really are creating a community and an alternative kind of option to enlistment and to militarism.
You hinted towards the uncertainty of that process you both went through, of this vicious cycle of getting the letter to enlist, deciding to refuse, I'm assumingly getting arrested or, charged. Can you talk about that cycle? Because it could be never ending, right? That's what you mean about that uncertainty. Like they could have kept doing that to you over and over again. And they did, right?
Yes.
You didn't just refuse once, serve time, and then go on your merry way.
No, it's not like a crime that it says exactly, but on the law doesn't say for how long you're going to be sentenced. So when you refuse, you don't know if you're going to sit for 2 years, for 2 weeks, or for 2 years, like the ones who sat the most in the beginning of the 2000s. So that can be very, very scary. I sat 87 days in military prison. And there's different paths you can take. I appealed to a conscientious committee before my enlistment date. And in that conscientious committee, they checked if I align with being a conscientious objector as it's determined by the military. The criteria isn't exposed to the public, and what they're looking for is this really unrealistic kind of pacifism, of not using any violence in any situation, any hypothetical situation. And like international standards state that conscientious objectors are ones who their conscientious doesn't allow them to participate in. It could be a specific war, it could be a specific military, it could be any military. They don't have to necessarily be pacifist. So I wasn't recognized as a conscientious objector, and then on my enlistment day, I refused and was sentenced to time in military prison. And during that time that I was in military prison, I was imprisoned again and again. Each time you get a sentence, it could be 7 days, could be 20, 30, 45 days, and then you're sent back home with another enlistment order. You come again to the enlistment center, you refuse again, you're sentenced again. That goes on and on and on, but everyone has a completely different story.
I'm very curious about this threshold you have to pass in order to be deemed enough of a pacifist to, be unfit for service or, be released from service. Why wouldn't you, if you knew this, perhaps, you didn't know the criteria, but why wouldn't people just simply say, yeah, fine, no violence ever. That's what I believe in because I don't want to serve.
I tried to do that. I appealed to 2 conscientious committees.
During his imprisonments.
Yes. They asked me questions such as, what would you do if someone tried to attack you? What would you do on October 7th if you were in the kibbutz? And I answered everything very, very pacifist-like. I said, I don't know. I probably would have frozen. I can't handle violence. It makes me sick. Stuff like that. But then I see they have a big stack of paper in front of them, every one of the people on the committee. And they say, turn to page 3. And on page 3, they have quotes for my interviews. Oh. And in the interview, supposedly, I said something about being against the war, which, wow,
doesn't align with what
doesn't align with the broader pacifist view. Because if you're against the war, if you're against this war, then how could you be a broad pacifist? That's what they want. They want someone who would not enlist to any army ever.
And it's not political also, and doesn't have any aspirations to create change in society.
They really did their homework on you. Did they do that for everybody, or did they kind of have a feeling you were going to object? Were you involved with resistance activity prior to?
They knew who I was. I was one of the organizers of the refusal letter during the judicial reform protest. We got over 280 signatures, and it was on national media all over the country. We got condemnations from members of Knesset and from the head of the military.
So they knew you were doing good work, yes?
Yes, exactly. They knew my face, they knew who I was, and they took interviews from that time to prove that I'm not a general pacifist. So just think of the experience of being an 18-year-old just out of high school, going into a room filled with military generals that are probably 3 times my age, and getting tested on your pacifism, which I'm sure they are all very much pacifists, right? The military generals.
Yeah, the contrast, though, puts, I just feel it in my gut and my stomach, this, Palestinian youth your age, and us talking about, being pacifists, and then realizing at the same time the right to resistance.
I'm not a pacifist, by the way. I lied. I'm not.
No, I understand that. I guess because I'm sitting here going are not pacifists because they believe or understand the right, to armed resistance of an illegal occupation. The youth of Palestine are faced with completely different choices, especially at that age. And
And the risk they have for those actions is way higher than the risk we have for our actions. We did sit for not small amounts of time in military prison, but it's not anything like what Palestinian youth or Palestinian men and women have to sit in
the Israeli military
prisons.
prisons, the conditions are very far away from each other. It's very, very different. And I would like to take this opportunity also to say that in Misalvat Network, we don't have like a specific ideology or agenda that everyone needs to align with. Like we have communists, we have pacifists, we have anarchists, we have all kinds of people who aren't sure yet what's their political ideology, ones who don't want to put themselves in a box. We have all kinds of people, and I think that's the beauty of it, having refusers, that we do share like the basic and important values of resisting the genocide and the apartheid and occupation, and fighting to change in our society. But people have their own, like, we don't have a specific agenda, which I think is really nice.
One thing that confuses, I think, Canadians, or, a lot of people who aren't living inside Israel, is the politics around maybe the anti-war movement and then the anti-Zionist movement, because they could be overlapping, right? In that they want the bombs to stop, they want the genocide to stop, they want the hostages home. But it's because, like, there's politics behind the anti-war movement. So sometimes it's an anti-Netanyahu. We don't like the way he's handling this. We'd do it slightly different, or we would do it more peacefully, but not end the occupation. Can you give us an idea of what the anti-Zionist movement is like? Because, like, the work to decolonize from within. Because, like, as a Canadian, as a settler here, I wanted to ask you, like, and it's hard. I wanted to say, like, you folks need to do more, not you as in you two. Israel society need to do more than just not go in the IDF, right? Like there's and not demolish Gaza or ethnically cleanse the West Bank. Like, you have to resist the whole idea of colonization and a settler state. But then, when I'm processing this in my notes and I'm confronted with the reality, I am in a settler state. I am a settler. I am benefiting from our history of ethnic cleansing, displacement, colonial violence, continued colonial violence, right? And I'll never feel like I'm doing enough from within either, right? Like, there's degrees into which people participate. So I pulled back on that, but I do want to press you, because I think, like, we should each challenge each other in that way, and in that, what can be done from within Israeli settler society to stop the whole occupation.
I totally agree with you that me and the all Israelis, we benefit from the systems of colonialism, the systems of apartheid, the fact that we live in a place where we have more rights than neighbors living a couple kilometers away, or maybe even next door down, is fucked up. And we like our existence there sometimes can benefit the system. And just like you say, in Canada or in the United States or in a lot of other places like this. But I do think that we need to take apart the systems of oppression, and we need to take apart the systems of colonialism. And that does not necessarily mean all Israelis leave to Europe, or all settler Canadians go back to wherever. That means taking what we have right now, which is 7 million Jews, 7 million Palestinians living from the river to the sea, and millions more Palestinians living in the diaspora, and take this and go forward from what we have, and aiding Palestinians in their struggle against colonialism. And, for example, the joint Palestinian-Israeli co-resistance in the South Hebron Hills, which is the most grassroots resistance, nonviolent that there is. and they stand in front of settlers, they stand in front of soldiers, and they farm their land, they take out their sheep, and this is the way of holding on to land, of resisting colonialism, and they do it together.
Yeah, you folks are at not a completely different stage of colonialism, but like there's active displacement, right? Like it seems like those are the front lines. Like we're in a different situation in Canada where we almost have to undo what has been done in the past, and where that starts is always not very clear, but where your front lines are a little more crystal clear at this moment. But that doesn't mean it makes you any easier to understand, what your role is or whatnot. I have a quote from Tal that really hit because it's kind of in contrast to how you describe the resolve of Israeli society at the moment. And you say, Israel has already lost this war. That's kind of what we want to hear, but it's not what perhaps we're seeing. I mean, the narrative is all over the place here in the Canadian media and Canadian public when it comes to Zionism, anti-Zionism. It's hard to see where we stand. But why do you think Israel's already lost this war?
I think it's because we live in a place where Israel is the occupying force. If you don't take out all the resistance, you lose. And for the resistance to win, the only thing they need to win is to survive. And I'm not saying that Hamas is beating Israel or is stronger than Israel in any way, but the fact that after a year and a half, first of all, I would say from the first day Israel had lost, because just the fact that we continued the turning a blind eye to the occupation and to the siege, and letting it blow up in our faces, I would say that any civilian, any soldier killed is losing, because I don't think there's a losing and winning side in a war. I think we all just lose at the end of the day. There's so much grief, and there's so many families that have lost children, uncles, fathers, brothers. Everyone loses, and especially Palestinians are losing right now too.
Do you get coverage of your tour back home? Do folks know what you're off doing right now?
No.
If you follow our Instagram, you might know. But
Yeah, it's on social media.
What will your reception be like when you go home? Do you plan to settle back in Tel Aviv?
We have a big privilege that as Israeli Jews, we can go abroad and have political talks and give lectures and have these public events and go back home and everything will be just as it was before. Looking at Palestinians that sometimes are invited abroad to do these kinds of political activities. Sometimes they face really tough persecution when they get back home.
And when I come back, I'm gonna go to Tel Aviv, but then maybe a week later, I'm gonna start an Arabic course in the South Hebron Hills in Masafer Yatta, where I'm sure you've heard of the movie No Other Land takes place, and take part in the co-resistance there.
If the listeners haven't watched it yet, then go watch it now.
Anna Littman is there.
I've met her. I was just there last week.
Yes. And, she has a blog on Substack. I'll link it to the episode. It's linked to almost every episode where I bring up Anna. But she talked about the movie because, I'm sure you've maybe heard some of the different opinions and views. I'm not really going to get into it because I didn't call you here for that. But I'm just going to interject to what Anna had to say because I thought it was interesting. I haven't had another chance to share it, and you kind of brought up the excitement of the people represented in the film to see their stories told on film. She sat with families who watched it with her and described the towns and who used to live there and the stories of those families and this family. And, it was a big deal. It meant a lot. And they understand the politics behind it. And she thought, say what you will about the film, just know that it's important, that this story be told. Whether you watch it or don't watch it, do something for the people of the West Bank. I kind of want to know, when we're talking about, war not being the answer and resistance from within, Do you folks have any idea what the solution looks like? Like, we're often challenged with that, when we know what we don't want to see. That's kind of an
Yeah.
easy answer. The most difficult answer is, what does the solution look like? Like, what does the end of this violence look like?
Unfortunately, after October 7th, after the terrible, terrible massacre that happened, big parts of our society and the Israeli government took that trauma into revenge. And I think the first resistance is having a human voice, talking about humanity, and fighting the dehumanization of the Palestinian people, and not taking that trauma into revenge, recognizing and grieving what happened on October 7th is important. And what we're trying to do is be the voice be the human rights voice, be the voice that recognizes the power dynamics and inside of it fights to create a change and fights for human rights and freedom and a better future for the civilians living between the river and the sea. And I think that, like, going back to Masafir Yatta, because it's a place that's very dear to our hearts, and I really think that that's the example of what we should fight for, because we should fight for co-resistance and existing together and recognizing the faults of the past and recognizing where we have responsibility and taking those. I think looking into the future, I would like to see those who are responsible for the genocide to be taken accountable for that. And I don't like talking about practical solutions like the one state, two state. It feels very, very far. I know that people love to discuss it, but being like on ground, it feels so many steps ahead to me. That what I think we should fight for right now is international pressure on Israel to stop the genocide and stop the occupation and stop what's going on right now in the West Bank, that we're seeing the Israeli military destroying many Palestinian neighborhoods and insane settler violence. Those are the first steps. And from there we can continue. That's how I see it.
I don't know if it sounds kind of head in the clouds. I could say about a peace deal with the UAE that will bring independence to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, and then lead after a couple of years to like stuff like that to eventually end up with a one state, with the one democratic state, which is obviously the best end goal. It's really hard to see how there could be any acceptance inside of Israeli society for any kind of Palestinian independence. And right now, there are concrete actions that our government and other governments could take to bring that a little bit closer. So, if that is sanctions, if that is stopping arms sales to Israel, the Israeli government could easily stop settler violence. It could stop evicting tens of thousands of people from their houses in the West Bank because it's not justified in any way. There are concrete actions that the Israeli government could take if it was really interested in peace, which obviously it isn't. And also, the Israeli public is obviously not interested in peace. That's the spiel about the future. I'm not very optimistic.
That's valid. Those, that's completely valid. We end up all over the place, right? It's knowing you just have to focus on, the first steps ahead, right? And they're just so fucking daunting. So
Yeah.
I don't blame you for just, keeping your eyes on where you think you can make an impact. That's all we all can do.
Yeah.
I don't expect you to have like the answer. I was just, I guess, trying to get a bit of an idea of what your vision of a peaceful region looks like. But again, those are very, very kind of complex questions that we don't seem close to answering right now.
I don't believe that the peace will come from Israelis suddenly realizing that Palestinians deserve independence or human rights. I believe that somehow, someday, very close, it could be, there would be a big block of Israelis that realize that if there's enough pressure from international governments, they will say, we are practical. We want to go to Europe without getting arrested. We want peace with the UAE, we want quiet in our region, we don't want any more war, that might create a more practical bloc that doesn't talk about human rights, but talks about it as a just the only option we have left.
Absolutely. I saw you folks give a press conference and, look square in the camera and say, stop selling weapons to my country. You don't often see people making that plea. Beyond pressuring our own governments to do what they can internationally, how could comrades here in Canada help the anti-Zionist movement within Israel?
I think that supporting us and sharing our stories and amplifying our voices of ones who refuse and other activists, other radical activists in the Israeli society that are fighting with the Palestinians, and we need your solidarity and we need your pressure.
Fighting alongside us.
Fighting alongside, fighting alongside the Palestinians, and I think the change is gonna come from within and without. We need both. And we have our part, which we're doing back home, and you guys have your part overseas. And I think that is whether it's supporting humanitarian aid, whether that's sharing stories of refusers, of Palestinian activists, of displaced Palestinian communities, whether it's educating your community, taking initiative and educating on what's going on right now in Palestine, educating about the genocide, having conversations, screening no other land. There's many, many things that you can do. Supporting your Palestinian activists, being part in demonstrations. There's many, many things that you can do, and I really encourage each person that listens to see what kind of initiative they can be part of or lead.
I very much appreciate your time coming into the studio. Is there anything that you feel you didn't get to say before?
I would like to share that there's a new refuser that is gonna refuse on March 19th, which is just in a few days. Her name is Ella Keidar Greenberg. She's a very brave trans woman. She's 18 years old, and she is going to publicly refuse to enlist to the military, connecting the queer resistance and the fight for human rights and for the Palestinian liberation between the river and the sea. She is going to refuse, like I said, on March 19th. We do not know in what conditions she will be held, for how much time they will sentence her, whether she'll be sent to women's prison, to men's prison, be held by herself. We do not know what's going to happen, and we ask you all to follow Miss Sawat on social media and follow Ella's story and support it and share it.
Were you her mentor?
Yes, I'm very lucky to be her mentor. She's a dear friend.
You just spoke with such
pride, yeah.
So proud, kind of talking about her story, but she's going into a very precarious situation. So knowing, maybe that you folks have helped prepare her for the experience is invaluable. Support systems, for all activists right across the globe going through what we're all going through right now. And so hearing about those kinds of stories is amazing. The mentorship that you folks have done there, so more and more people can get through it, as safely as possible. Thank you for resisting. Thank you for sharing your stories of resistance. And we will continue to help the Palestinian resistance together. So thank you so much for your time as well in our little studio.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Have a good day.
I just wanted to add a few notes onto the end here, because after we finished that interview, I found myself looking for ways in which I could apply their experience with our own goals to decolonize. If Israelis will only act out of external pressures, where will our pressures come from here in Canada? Where do our duties as settlers begin and end? Because just as Tal and Einat's mere presence within the occupation helps to maintain it, we too help legitimize the colonial state. Even though our eyes are on Palestine in this moment, of course, I thought there was value in making these comparisons and hopefully opening up a few more questions to explore as we together find ways to keep disrupting. that is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.